today seems to be that right time to be speaking about India's nuclear doctrine and strategy. That's the subject that I was asked to address. And as was said, nuclear issues are just too serious to be left only to the government. I think all of us have a stake in the nuclear future, and therefore, for us to understand what is this doctrine and strategy that we are talking about, why did India go in for nuclear weapons? Why do we have them at all? Why do we still talk about disarmament despite having nuclear weapons? Those are some of the issues that I'll try to bring out before you in the next about half an hour. And I'm more than happy to engage in a discussion on this. Nobody knows the right answers on nuclear, issues. You have fought as many nuclear wars as I have, and each one of us has to understand the nuances that come here, because tomorrow when you read the newspaper and you see an article or a news item on nuclear, you must be able to dig a little deeper to understand what exactly is this all about. So that's what I hope I'll be able to convey to you. So basically what I want to do is to speak about why does India have nuclear weapons? What is India's nuclear doctrine and how did it come about? There are three important dimensions of the nuclear doctrine that we can talk about. One is credible minimum deterrence, no first use, massive retaliation. And the question is, are these good for India? Because in everybody's mind, the question keeps coming up, why did we say minimum? Could we not have just left it at credible deterrence? So what is the significance of minimum here? Why should it be no first use? If you have nuclear weapons, just having nuclear weapons should be good enough. Why do you have to then specify no first use? So I'll try and explain my understanding of why these are part of our doctrine. And I think, according to me, they are good for India, but I'm willing to listen to what you have to say. And then we'll end with some takeaways from the talk. So my first question is as to why does India have nuclear weapons? So basically, what the point I want to make here is that security and not prestige is the reason that India has nuclear weapons. If you were to do a Google search on why India has nuclear weapons, amongst the first Western author articles that will appear, they will tell you that India has it for status and for prestige, which is not really the truth. India has nuclear weapons because of the security situation that we happen to be in. General Bhadoria pointed it out to you. We are surrounded by two nuclear-armed states with whom we have territorial disputes. These are not just border disputes, but entire territories of India are claimed by both Pakistan and China, both of which have revisionist agendas. They have both said that they would like to have, these territories back with themselves. Then in the 1990s, India was faced by extremely a trajectory on non-proliferation that pushed us towards nuclear weapons. I want you to just understand a little bit of this history. In 1974, if you remember, India conducted a peaceful nuclear explosion. Thereafter, we had demonstrated, and I must also say that when India conducted the peaceful nuclear explosion, this was a legitimate exercise. The International Atomic Energy Agency actually allowed for PNEs to take place, and US and Soviet Union had conducted several PNEs for the purpose of their economic reasons, whether it was getting down deep into geological mining or changing courses of rivers. This was taken to be an exercise that was useful. And India conducted the PNE where it was not in violation of anything. We had in any case, not joined the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But from 74 to 98, India did not move overtly towards nuclear weapons. Now, the hope was that the world will itself move towards nuclear disarmament before we would have to go towards nuclear weapons. Our concern at that moment was China. China had tested its nuclear weapons in 1964. And if that was the main concern, we had fought a war with them in 1962. China goes nuclear in 1964, and it certainly begins to weigh on the Indian mind that you've got a nuclear armed state at your border. But India refrained from going towards nuclear weapons till 1998. So why was 1998 so important? Because, as I'm pointing out to you, the non-proliferation pressures were beginning to rise on India. there is what is known as the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. India had not joined the NPT because it had created two classes of states, nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. And India was asked to join as a non-nuclear weapon state because a nuclear weapon state, according to the definition that was given to the NPT, was a country which had tested a nuclear weapon before the 1st of January 1967. If you had not tested before that, then you could not be a nuclear weapon state. And that's the argument that China continues to make, that you are illegitimate as a nuclear weapon state because you had not tested before 67. You test only in 1998. Now, the hope of India was that even if we had not joined the NPT, that the NPT, one of the clauses of the NPT would take the nuclear weapon states towards elimination of nuclear weapons. So nuclear disarmament will be the solution for our national security. Because if China could be disarmed of its nuclear weapons, then that was something that was good for us. And we were hoping that the NPT will be the route to do that. But in 1995, the NPT was given an unconditional and an indefinite extension. So the hope that India had that NPT will take the world towards disarmament was gone. And in the meantime, there is another treaty that enters the picture. This is called the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the CTBT, which was putting a ban on testing. Because unless you have tested, you don't have a credible nuclear weapon. So the idea was that countries like India and Pakistan should be not allowed to test their nuclear weapons, and the CTBT was concluded in 1996. Now, this CTBT had an annex to it which listed 44 countries by name. It was very uncharacteristic that a treaty should do this, but these 44 countries were asked to join the CTBT in the next 3 years. If they did not join, then all kinds of sanctions and even military action against them was being contemplated. So India had the window between 1996 and 1999 to take a call on what it wanted to do with its nuclear capability. You know, up till now, we had decided that we were happy sitting on the fence. We had a capability, but we did not feel the need to bring it out. In fact, General Bhadauria mentioned that Pakistan went nuclear in 1998, which is correct. They tested 2 weeks after we did. But Pakistan is known to have had nuclear weapons from 1987 onwards. That's the time when A.Q. Khan, everybody knows A.Q. Khan as the father of Pakistan's nuclear weapons and the proliferation exercise. So A.Q. Khan in 1987 had given an interview to an Indian journalist in which he made it very clear that Pakistan had nuclear weapons. And if you see from 1988 onwards, we see an uptick in insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir because they now felt that they had a shield behind which they could do whatever they wanted and India would not be able to retaliate because of the danger of nuclear weapons. So from 87 onwards, they were nuclear. India was still hoping. And if again, 1988, Rajiv Gandhi, then as Prime Minister, went to the special session on disarmament, presented a full plan on how the world could be moved towards nuclear disarmament. But given that the Cold War was still very active at that time, this was dismissed. And we were then in a situation where Pakistan had gone nuclear, China was already nuclear, and the non-proliferation pressures were beginning to come upon us to say either join the NPT as a non-nuclear weapon state or join at least the CTBT, which would foreclose our option of going nuclear thereafter. So it's in these circumstances that India then decided to test in 1998 because it wanted to make itself overtly known as a nuclear weapon state. So this is what then happens. And the nuclear test is done for signaling deterrence in an open manner. So credibility then is why we test it. Because for nuclear deterrence, credibility is really the key. And credibility, it has to be in the eye of the adversary. It's not about what I'm thinking in my mind about my nuclear deterrence, but what is the adversary thinking about my nuclear deterrence? And as I often say, deterrence is like a three-legged stool. You have 3 legs of that stool as necessary capability, which means having the warheads and the delivery systems. You need to have the resolve to use that capability because there's no point in having that capability but not indicating. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, Khrushchev on the Soviet side, uh, after the crisis, he said, I never doubted that Kennedy had the capability, that the US had the capability. But the question mark was on whether they will use that capability. So the resolve, an indication of that resolve is extremely important. And some of the manifestations of that resolve is through your command and control systems. So whether it is the military command and control, which in the Indian case is the Strategic Forces Command, or whether it is the political command and control, where the Prime Minister, as the head of the Cabinet Committee on Security and of the National Command Authority, is the person who will take that call. Now, the good thing is that you don't have to go to war or use nuclear weapons to show your resolve. Resolve is indicated through a range of actions that governments take. So any hard decision that is taken by a government, I think, goes to indicate resolve. Whether it was demonetization, and I'm not going into a value judgment on whether that was good or bad, but the fact that a hard decision like demonetization was taken, or that during COVID, India was brought to a standstill just over a period of 3 hours, these are the hard decisions that go to show resolve. And that is what goes to establish credibility also of nuclear deterrence. And the third is the most important dimension is communication. Because if you have the capability and you have the resolve, but you don't communicate it, signaling is such an important dimension of nuclear deterrence, because nuclear deterrence is essentially a mind game. You are playing on the perceptions of the other side, and therefore communication becomes a very important thing. I think for a long period of time, 2008 was mentioned. There was a long period of time when we were not talking about our nuclear capability at all. And that's when we all started feeling that our deterrence credibility was low, because signaling has to be undertaken. And simple things like even the celebration of the Foundation Day of SFC and a public statement on that is indication of communication, that you've got a body which can handle nuclear deterrence breakdown and take care of the adversary if it has to do that. So this is how we were doing signaling. One of the important tools of signaling is nuclear doctrine. And I think India did a very wise step by putting out the nuclear doctrine very early in its journey of nuclear weapons. So we tested in 1998 May, and it was on 17th August 1999 that the first National Security Advisory Board had prepared the doctrine and presented it to the government. They presented it to NSA, which was Mr. Prajesh Mishra at that time. And he took a very uncharacteristic step by making it public. Because till then, everything nuclear was very secret. Even the military didn't know that there were nuclear weapons that were going to be tested in 1998. So here he was putting a doctrine out in public, which was explaining as to why India had nuclear weapons, what was going to be the role of nuclear weapons, how are we going to employ them, how are we going to deploy them. All of that was listed in that draft nuclear doctrine. So when he put it out for public debate, there was a lot of criticism about the doctrine. On its content, it was criticized at home because the first National Security Advisory Board itself had members who were not all completely in agreement on the idea of credible minimum deterrence and no first use. We now know that very rigorous debates took place, and while they put their signature to the doctrine, they did continue to talk about some of these contents. And outside the doctrine, the very act that we were bringing out a doctrine was criticized a lot, because the US, President Clinton, was still asking India to cap and roll back and eliminate its program. And if we were bringing out a doctrine, then we were suggesting we were serious about the business of nuclear weapons, that we were going to keep them. So I was in IDSA at that time, and I remember participating in many conferences where Mr. K. Subramaniam, the maker of the doctrine, and Air Commodore Jasjeet Singh, who was amongst his deputies, writing the doctrine, used to engage with the Americans. Then they would come and tell you that nuclear weapons, are like snakes. You don't want to have them. And K. Subramaniam would bang the table and say, but we are a land of snake charmers. We will know how to deal with this, and we are serious about having our nuclear weapons. And I think that's the signal that India sent out when it tested and then put out a nuclear doctrine. Now, because of all the debate that we've had, this draft doctrine remains a draft till today. It hasn't been formalized. But nearly all of the elements of this draft doctrine have been brought into what we now know as India's nuclear doctrine, which was put out by the Cabinet Committee on Security as a press note on the 4th of January 2003. So speaking today, we are almost 25 years with this nuclear doctrine and 26 years old as a nuclear armed state. And now I want to talk about some of the dimensions of the doctrine. All of the basic attributes are the same as draft, except for two differences. One of that difference is that India suggests now that we will use nuclear deterrence against a large-scale biological or a chemical weapons attack. This had not been mentioned earlier. And if anybody is interested, we can talk about why we did it and why we continue to have it. And the other difference is the draft doctrine spoke about assured punitive retaliation, whereas this doctrine now is speaking about massive retaliation. And I do have a slide to explain what is the meaning of massive retaliation. So these are the four major attributes of India's nuclear doctrine: credible minimum deterrence, no first use, massive retaliation, and universal nuclear disarmament. I will focus on the first three. Disarmament remains India's objective in the long term. Unfortunately, the world doesn't seem to be prepared at this moment. Perhaps we are waiting for a crisis to happen before people will wake up to the idea that disarmament is the only thing to do with nuclear weapons. But till we can get to that stage, I think India has a very sane and mature policy with which it is keeping its nuclear weapons, and that is in these three dimensions. So let me start with the idea of credible minimum deterrence, which is basically a philosophy. It is not about identifying numbers. It's about indicating that India is not going to do the runaway stockpile accumulation as was done by the Cold War superpowers. So USA and USSR, if you remember, had as many as 60,000-70,000 nuclear weapons at the peak of the Cold War in the 1980s. It's only in recent times that they have started bringing down their numbers, and they have agreed, according to certain treaties, to bring down the numbers to 1550 at this moment in time. But even then, these are what are declared numbers. They've got several more in their reserves, which are still existing. So India came to the approach of nuclear weapons by saying that we will have only as much as is necessary to cause unacceptable damage. And if you see, nuclear weapon is not an ordinary weapon. It's a weapon of mass destruction. To recall, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which have been the only instances where nuclear weapon has been used, only one nuclear weapon was used. One on Hiroshima, one on Nagasaki. And immediately, within seconds, 80,000 people are believed to have vaporized at the ground zero and in a radius of as much as 2 kilometers. And by the end of the year, this was used in August, by the end of the year, out of the total population of Hiroshima of 350,000, only, I think, 1 lakh survived. 140,000 had passed away by the end of that year. So this is the nature of this weapon. And it was one weapon of just 12 to 15 kilotons. Today we have megaton weapons in the superpowers, and we certainly have hundreds of kiloton weapons in our own arsenal. So this is the nature of this weapon that we are talking about, and therefore India said, we don't want a very large stockpile. All that you need is enough to be able to cause unacceptable damage to the other side. So the least necessary is why we have credible minimum deterrence. It should be credible so that the adversary knows it will cause him unacceptable damage, but it will be minimum that is necessary to cause that kind of a damage. Because the larger the stockpile, the more are your security and safety issues also that one has to deal with. Now the question then is, when we are saying unacceptable damage, then how do you calculate what is unacceptable damage? Because what is unacceptable to me may not be the same as what is unacceptable to Pakistan or to China. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, US was not willing to take the loss of one city. So that was unacceptable for them. Whereas China always used to suggest that 50 million will die, 50 million more will live to be able to take forward our revolution. So, how countries calculate what is unacceptable for them has to be carefully studied so that you can get at the right number. So, historical experiences of a nation, what is the value at stake? Taiwan, for instance, is deemed to be of such extreme value for China that they could go in for a nuclear exchange. But would Arunachal Pradesh have the same value for them? We have to do that cost benefit calculation to realize what would be the value at stake. The state of economic development. The more economically developed a country is, the less it's likely to want to lose it all. So North Korea's ability to take damage versus today's China's ability to take damage could be quite different. And then the political system, how open or closed a political system is, also goes to determine what is your unacceptability level. Besides these four parameters, and one could add many more to this, two other determinants are very important. One is faith in the reliability of our own arsenal. How much do we think that if we are putting a nuclear weapon on a city, thinking that it will have a yield of a particular kind, how much faith do we have that that yield will actually come about? So if we don't have enough faith, then you might need to have more nuclear weapons. And lastly, faith in the survivability. Because India has a no first use doctrine, which means I will not use nuclear weapons first. How much faith do I have in the survivability of my arsenal so that I'm still able to do unacceptable damage after taking a strike on myself? So all of this goes to calculating what will be that magic number that you want to have in your nuclear arsenal. And in the case of our region, India, China, Pakistan, none of the three countries disclose what those numbers are. Unlike US, Russia, France, UK, who annually give out what the numbers in their nuclear inventory is. But we don't talk about it. We believe ambiguity is the way to practice deterrence rather than talk about numbers. So now the questions that come up with numbers is that if the adversary is increasing his arsenal, up till this year, when we have been told by international organizations that do some calculation on numbers, India's nuclear weapons are today at 172 and Pakistan is at 170. Now, this has happened for the first time in 26 years that India seems to have overtaken Pakistan on its nuclear numbers. And I remember up till now, Pakistan was always 7, 8 nuclear warheads more than us. And this used to create a lot of angst in our media to say, how can it be? Pakistan इतना छोटा सा country है, उसके पास क्या है, economically इतना बुरे हाल में है, and still it has nuclear weapons which are more than India. It didn't matter then. And it doesn't matter today that India has 2 nuclear warheads more than Pakistan. Because as I'm suggesting to you, it's not about numbers. It's about your ability to do unacceptable damage, which means bringing in many other dimensions, command and control, survivability. How are you keeping your nuclear warheads so that they survive to be able to signal that I will cause you harm if you use your nuclear weapons? Because that's the role of nuclear weapons, deterrence. So if the other side has more or a little less, it doesn't matter. There's nothing like nuclear superiority or parity. And in relation to the adversary's missile defense, if he's able to protect himself with a missile defense, then numbers begin to matter because you will need to have more to saturate that missile defense to cause unacceptable damage. That is why China is increasing its numbers today, because the Americans are saying we have a missile defense and we will be able to protect ourselves. So we can do first strike and then protect ourselves from your retaliation. And therefore, China is wanting to build more numbers. Now, fortunately for us, up till now, China doesn't have a credible missile defense. So our numbers don't really need to go berserk, despite China increasing its numbers. China had 6 nuclear warheads when the US had 60,000 nuclear warheads. And it still felt that it had credible deterrence against them. North Korea has just about 30, 40 nuclear weapons compared to the US, which has 1,500 deployed nuclear warheads. And yet North Korea is able to stand up. So numbers don't matter. It is your ability to do unacceptable damage. And if that ability to do unacceptable damage is affected, then your numbers need to increase by a certain amount. And India's concept of credible minimum deterrence gives us enough dynamic space to be able to do that. So I don't see any reason why we should be giving up the concept of credible minimum deterrence. Coming next to the question of no first use. Now, the idea of no first use is I will not be the first to use nuclear weapons. And this is something that doesn't appeal to people. How can it be that you have a nuclear weapon and you don't suggest that I will do first use? तो हमने रखा किस लिए है? Aksar, that is the language which we normally seem to be talking about it with. Because the discontentment comes with the thing that because we are suggesting passivity, I've heard it from several people to say, ये तो वही बात हुई कि हम थप्पड़ खाएंगे तो हम थप्पड़ मारेंगे. तो हम पहले क्यों खाना चाहते हैं थप्पड़? So it is reflecting passivity. And you're allowing Pakistan then to take you for a ride because you are suggesting कि मैं nuclear weapon तो use नहीं करूँगा. And the threat potential of China is being increased because we are suggesting no first use. So it tends to put India at a disadvantage. This is the common understanding of no first use, that it is putting India at a disadvantage, and we are accepting the idea that we will let our country be destroyed before we will use nuclear weapons. So you are letting the military initiative go to the other side. Now the whole problem is this is conventional thinking. When nuclear weapons enter the equation, then we have to think a little differently. And that becomes the biggest problem to convince people as to why no first use is a good strategy. Unfortunately, we haven't tried enough to explain what is the military logic of no first use. This is the superficial understanding. But if you look at, as I've been trying to explain now, some of the dilemmas that come with first use strategies. There are several questions that, suppose tomorrow you get up and you get to know that India now has a first use strategy. There is a conflict which is taking place at the border with either of the countries you can choose. Now the question that will come is, when do you want to use the nuclear weapon? Early in conflict or late in conflict? Look at the Russia-Ukraine war. Right from the first day when Russia went into Ukraine, President Putin had started saying, I have nuclear weapons and I'm going to use nuclear weapons. He had put nuclear weapons on high alert according to the statement that he made at that moment in time. But 3 years into the conflict, has he been able to use his nuclear weapons? Has he found it useful to use his nuclear weapons? So this dilemma of when you're going to use is a dilemma for the first user. For a no first use country like India, the only reason why you would use nuclear weapons is when the other side has used nuclear weapons against you. So there's a very clear red line which has been laid. Unlike the first user who has to make his red lines known and to practice deterrence effectively. The second question is, where would you target as a first user? Would it be against military targets? Would it be against cities? Or would it be a mix of both? And this question is important to answer because your arsenal is going to depend on the answer to this question. If you want to answer as counter force, then the kind of missile accuracy that you need to have, the numbers of warheads that you need to have, everything will change compared to counter value. Because if it's a counter value weapon, then smaller numbers, inaccurate missiles won't matter. Whether the bomb falls over Sarojini Nagar or Lajpat Nagar or anywhere else, it won't really matter. It's hitting at a counter value, a city target. How do you guarantee that there will be no nuclear retaliation after you have used your nuclear weapon first? Because what happens is, despite the US having the kind of arsenal that it had, it never could have what is known as a splendid first strike, where you can take out everything that the other side has. The US is not able to take that risk with North Korea, despite having such good ISR, accuracy, capability, numbers. And lastly, what benefit do you get from first use if the other side is still going to have enough to hit you back? If you had not used, perhaps the other side would not have used it at all. But now you've reached a stage where you have incited the other side also to use its nuclear weapons against you. So what is the benefit that you get from a first use strategy? Rather, since I spoke about credibility being central to nuclear deterrence, for a credible first use, You need to show all of this. You need to have a large arsenal with counter force capability. You have to keep the nuclear weapons on head trigger alert. You know, the US keeps its nuclear weapons on readiness. They even have the bombers, which are constantly flying 24 by 7. They have their submarines out at sea at all time, which calls for a huge amount of investment of money, of energy, and of risk taking, because at any point things can go wrong. And we've seen in the US Soviet Union scenario how so many false alarms and mistakes did take place. We were lucky that we didn't blow ourselves up. So all of this are the requirement for a first use strategy. Whereas for India, by taking on a no first use strategy, we have liberated ourselves on many fronts. So there is no weight of first use that you're carrying. The Prime Minister doesn't have to decide immediately as to when he's going to use his nuclear weapons. The onus of escalation is on the adversary. So in conventional war, you want to keep the onus with you. But in a nuclear situation, you'd rather let the adversary decide. And you are deterring the adversary from taking that decision by suggesting that you've got a capability which will cause him more harm than any gain that he makes. That's deterrence. So you're deterring the possibility of that first use from taking place. And a decision to retaliate could be far easier, legitimate, and guilt-free, rather than put yourself in the shoes of a prime minister who has to take that call that I'm going to use my nuclear weapons against the other side, not only cause harm to them, but also bring back harm on myself, because retaliation of some kind is going to take place from the other side. So that's why having a no first use strategy makes military as well as political sense. Now, sometimes people question, should we not drop no first use because Pakistan is continuing terrorism against us? And my answer to that is no, because terrorism is a very low cost revisionist strategy for Pakistan. That is something that they will continue to do. And if you have a first use strategy, it's going to pull you into a commitment trap. And for every terror incident that takes place, I don't think nuclear weapon is the answer to that. You have to find other ways of raising cost, as we have done with the Uri, the surgical strikes, as well as the Balakot air strikes later, which has dented the image of the Pakistani military, as well as put them into a difficult economic and diplomatic situation. Now, if Pakistan is lowering its threshold by the idea of tactical nuclear weapons, everybody would have heard of tactical nuclear weapons. It's so much in today's environment. But really, India's strategy is that there's nothing like a tactical nuclear weapon. A nuclear weapon is a nuclear weapon. And irrespective of what you might call when you are using it against me, you can think of it as a tactical nuclear weapon. For me, it breaches the red line which I have with no first use, and I'm going to retaliate with my nuclear weapons. So this whole idea of tactical nuclear weapons, which is brandished by Pakistan, is part of their brinksmanship strategy. They are doing it in order to constrain India's space to fight a conventional conflict with them. And if we understand that, then we don't have to fall into the bait of having to respond with tactical nuclear weapons. Rather, our suggestion of the kind of strategic deterrence that we are signaling should be enough to do that. Because what Pakistan is trying to do is to link its conventional operations with its nuclear. Whereas what India is trying to do is to de-link the two, to say that I can fight a conventional war. The moment we start talking about tactical nuclear weapons, we are compressing that space. By suggesting no first use with no tactical nuclear weapons, we are expanding the space to be able to fight a conventional, or give them a conventional response for their acts of terrorism. Now, in the case of China, this is signifying China. If we are conventionally inferior to China, then should we change our no first use? Because then people say, okay, Pakistan is taken care of, but China ka kya kare? So, when it keeps troubling us at the border, then what should we do? Should we change our no first use to first use? And do we think that will make them stop their skirmishes at the border? I don't think so. If you go to my next question, which is, what kind of retaliation do we need to then show to China and to Pakistan? According to our doctrine, it needs to be retaliation will be massive. Now, the question again that often comes up in people's mind is we are suggesting massive retaliation. Now, would massive retaliation be credible against low order use? अगर उसने थोड़ा सा nuclear weapon use किया against our military targets in his territory, which is often a scenario which is played out that Indian troops are in Pakistani territory and he uses a so-called tactical nuclear weapon against those troops. Now, can India do massive retaliation? So people often question whether we should therefore not build our own tactical nuclear weapons to deal with a situation like this. And would the threat of proportionate response deter better than the idea of massive retaliation? But my question here is, what is proportionate with the use of nuclear weapons? Is it about numbers? So he's used 2 tactical nuclear weapons against you. Should you use 2 or 3? And that will be the answer. What is it about the target? If it's a military target, then you hit back somewhere there. The extent of damage that happens now or that lasts over a period of time. You know, when I visited Hiroshima, the Atomic Memorial Museum, there is one poster there which has 3 words on it. And they really, jump out at you. It says it never ends. That's the difference between a conventional and a nuclear weapon, that it is intergenerational. You might start with the idea of proportionate response, what you think is proportionate to what he's done to you. But if the damage done is more and he's going to come back with more nuclear weapons, you're on a slippery slope already. And you could very quickly be going to a full-scale nuclear war, which would have consequences of all kinds, lasting over generations. And here we are talking about geographies, conjoined to each other. We are right next to each other. So therefore, there's nothing proportionate about the use of nuclear weapons. And therefore, the idea that India is suggesting is I deter by the idea of disproportionate response. It's not proportionate because, as I'm suggesting, there's nothing proportionate here. But our concept of massive retaliation need not be all that you have. We go by the English language word massive, and we think massive matlab sara dal denge usi mein. It does not need to be that because the impact is going to be massive. It's not about the numbers. Even if you were to drop 2 nuclear warheads on 3 gorges dam, don't you think the impact will be massive? That's what you have to suggest rather than talk about what would be proportionate. The choice of targets to cause unacceptable damage is not difficult given the nature of this weapon. It's a weapon of mass destruction. And given the densities of population that we have in our region, what would not be massive? Whatever nuclear use you do would be a massive use. I think the distinction between counter force and counter value in our part of the world is artificial. And we should not get into this game of tactical nuclear weapons. So my important thing is to improve signaling. The other side should not have an iota of doubt about the fact that you are going to do retaliation and that whether we call it massive or not, it's going to be unacceptable damage on the other side. So my last, I think, question is, have nuclear weapons brought us security or not? And there is no yes or no answer to this. It is yes for the fact that no nuclear war between the 3 countries has taken place. But it is no if you think that nuclear weapon was to be the answer to terrorism or to LAC skirmishes. Certainly nuclear weapons haven't helped us resolve that. And the reason for that is that they are not the answer for those kinds of issues. Nuclear weapons, and therefore India has given itself a very narrow role for nuclear weapons because that's the only credible role for nuclear weapons, which is to say nuclear deterrence. It might not be the role that the rest of the world has given to its nuclear weapons, but really the only credible thing that you can do with nuclear weapons is deter nuclear weapons. All of the other challenges that you have on security will have to be dealt with other instruments. You cannot use a sword for, swatting a mosquito. So terrorism or LAC skirmishes are important challenges for India, but nuclear weapons are not the answer. And the more we start thinking in our mind that how can it be a nuclear weapon state is being troubled by terrorism, well, your nuclear weapons are not the answer to that terrorism. You have to find other ways of dealing with that and not feel helpless or in despair for the fact that you are a nuclear armed state but you're troubled by terrorism. So I think we need to put that in perspective. So the last thing I want to then say is that limitations of credibility of nuclear use are there. This is something that we must keep in mind. The nature of the nuclear weapon is a weapon of mass destruction. It is futile for war fighting. As I'm saying, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, after such a long time, and if you remember, the West has been saying Russia is going to use its nuclear weapons right from the beginning. So any military setback that happened to Russia, whether it was Moscow that was sunk, whether it was Kremlin that was attacked by drones, whether some of the territory that it had taken had to be given back to Ukraine, all of those situations, the West was saying now he's going to use his nuclear weapons. But Russia has not found it useful because war fighting with nuclear weapons is a different ballgame altogether, and I don't think anybody wants to go there. It's no political objective is seen to be worth that cost. It's best suited for deterrence by punishment. That's why India doesn't take the concept of deterrence by denial by nuclear weapons. It is going by the idea of deterrence by punishment. Other threats will have to be dealt with other instruments. And for a country of India's size and capability, I don't think that's such a difficult task. But keeping the understanding of nuclear weapons for a narrow role that they are meant for is extremely important, so that we don't feel helpless about what is happening at other sides of the border. Thank you so much. I'll stop here and I look forward to any comments.